Last time we were talking, we had just moved to Pine Ridge via the U-Haul trailers and all of that experience. I talked some about the house that we moved into, which was the house that we were renovating for the church, and I made comment to the fact that we had lived in the basement and these things. One of the things while we were working on this was the fact that there were other mission work being done in Pine Ridge. There was the pastor of the Mennonite church, whose name was Earl Headland, and Earl, come to find out, was actually a cousin by marriage to me. Wasn't even aware of it when it first started out. But Earl's wife's father was a Grusing from Canada who married my mother's baby sister and lived in Kansas. And I didn't know about this until some time after we had been in Pine Ridge. Earl had been a missionary for at least 15, 20 years before we came to Pine Ridge. He had been out at Porcupine and had pastored out there, and then had moved into Pine Ridge and started the gospel mission there. Anyway, Earl Headland was one of the pastors there. Along with him was another pastor of the Wesleyan church, and this Wesleyan, it was the old time Methodist. Not in fact, the church was started by a rancher in the area that had Indian people on his heart, and he gave up his ranch work and started mission work. But probably the biggest thing that this leader did was he got a radio program, and it was aired out of Hot Springs, but it went all over the eastern part of the United States, and there were there were people that volunteered to come to Pine Ridge to work and do mission work among the Sioux. Now, preacher, I'm going to blow your mind away here. Rose Tucker came as a result of his work, of this missionary's work, this rancher's work. She and her husband Bill came and worked out at the Indian school out south on Cascade Road. Terry Holcomb came as a result of this, and it's just a wild connection. They had probably 10 or 15 Native American pastors that worked in churches scattered out across the reservation, in Hot Springs, in Rapid City. And but one of these was Ray McHugh, and Ray and his wife were missionaries at Pine Ridge at the mission there. Now, the reason I'm kind of giving you history on this and sharing this, when I first came to Pine Ridge, I knew nobody. I mentioned that that the Lord had brought in some people, doctors and school teachers and this type of thing. But some of the first people that we met was Ray McHugh and Earl Hedlund. And I will never forget, we were visiting one day, the three of us, down at the post office or somewhere, and Ray McHugh and Earl volunteered to come and help on our get our house ready for worship services. And Ray made a comment, and this was such a difference in most. When you try to do mission work, if there's others in the area, they kind of hold off. Well, Ray made this comment with Earl and I one day. He said, "You know what?" He said, "I'm really glad to see that you Baptists are here," because he said, "Harold, if you have 100 in Sunday school this morning, and Earl, you had another 100 in Sunday school Sunday, and I had 100 in Sunday school Sunday," he said, "that's 300 people in church. That only leaves us 1,700 more to reach, because Pine Ridge had 2,000 people in it." And but this was the attitude, and these two men became very good friends of mine. Now, their mission philosophy and mine was far different, and that's to be expected. I remember Earl. Earl had no desire to be involved in the school or in the political part of the government or the BIA or any of these things. And he said, "My work is spiritual, and that's it." And Ray and I worked off of the assumption that, we worked with the total people. It involved the school, it involved the tribe, it involved the BIA, it involved the hospital, it involved all of the areas. And I think probably we got closer to the people. Later on, I'm going to mention an experience of getting some property, and Earl Hedlund's response to this, which is comical, and I'll get into that as we go on. But the one thing I wanted us to see here was that here was a Mennonite missionary and a Wesleyan missionary that accepted me in with open arms, and even helped me get our building ready to have services and to get started. Now, we dedicated in October of October 31st, 1971. We dedicated the building, the Sioux Baptist Chapel. It was sponsored by the Sioux Baptist Chapel in Rapid City. A.L. Davis was pastor, and A.L. Davis had started the work at Sharp's Corner, and and had gotten the property and had started getting the building ready to where work could be started in Pine Ridge. Now, right along in this time when we first came, I mentioned that we could not get into our house, into our home, so we lived in the basement of the church. We had some time that we spent quite a bit of time up in the Black Hills, being tourist, getting acquainted. There's hardly a Forest Service road south of Mount Rushmore or Rapid City that we had not driven on. And if you'll ever get a map and look at that, that's a lot of roads. Well, while we were traveling along, we came through Keystone, and we saw a big Indian man dressed in his full Indian costume, headdress, all this type of thing. In fact, he had his horse there, and you could, for $4 or $5, you could take a picture of him and his horse, but while we were in Keystone, Lawrence, our youngest boy, who was about 8-9 years old then, took off and was like he always is, was seeing different people, and he never knew a stranger. And after a little while, here he comes running, "Dad, Mom," he said, "you got to come and meet my friend." And so we went with him, and sure enough, he took us to visit this big old Indian man, Pahuska. And he said, "Dad," he said, "this man is my friend." And he said he was born and raised in the house that we are living in now, that will become our church. And you got to understand Lawrence, and you got to understand the Lord's working. I mean, it all comes together. And but Pahuska became very close friends of ours. In fact, Pahuska many times would come to the res, and I would have a funeral. I remember one in particular, Dan Broken Legs. When Dan was buried, Pahuska came and visited was there for the funeral, and he and I visited, had a close relationship. I got tickled at him. Here he is, this big old Indian man, standing out here letting tourists take pictures of him. This man had a college education. He was a professional artist. We've got some artwork I've showed you up here on our wall, and this man would make $400 or $500 a day with people taking his pictures. But he had learned to be a businessman. And but anyway, I wanted to bring these experiences in because when we dedicated our church building, this had been his home. Now we did this in October of '71. Well, in March of '72, the American Indian movement came in and took over Wounded Knee. And we had only been there not even a year. And so it was a difficult time. Now, we had services out at Sharp's Corner. That was the church that called us. And it wasn't a church; it was a mission, also out of Sioux Chapel in Sioux Baptist Church in Rapid City. But we had services there on Sunday afternoon, and we had services there on Wednesday night. And we drove out. It was about 40 miles one way, and we drove out and had services there. When Wounded Knee was taken over, Wounded Knee is partway between Pine Ridge and Sharp's Corner. It's about halfway, but it's on the road. Well, when Wounded Knee was taken over, there was no traffic through that road, and we had to drive 100 miles around for a service. The takeover of Wounded Knee, there's a lot of different publicity on it, and it's most everything that you read about Wounded Knee was not really the things that really transpired there. One of the things, it was a well-planned takeover and trying to create problems for the tribal leadership and for the government. One of the things that is not told, there was CBS and NBC and several other news media who had mobile units sitting in Wounded Knee when they AIM came in and took it over. I mean, it was a prior planned, orchestrated thing. And so there's we were involved, first of all, because of our travel through. We had to go around, which created a lot of problems for us time-wise and logistical. But in the early days of Wounded Knee, the takeover of Wounded Knee, when the government began to come in, the U.S. Marshals and I mentioned Ray McHugh. Ray was well known among the Indian people, and he was pretty well involved with the federal government when the FBI and the U.S. Marshals. And one of the first things that transpired when they came in, roadblocks were set up on the roads going into Wounded Knee, and checkpoints, and along with this, in those early days, the early hours of that takeover, the FBI set up a what they called a rumor control center, where people were manned a telephone number and were told, so if there were rumors about what was going on or questions about what was going on, that individual that worked there would be able to share up-to-date information, and also get information that the FBI or marshals might be able to use. And Ray told me, he said, Harold, he said, would you like to work in that rumor control center? And I agreed, and he said, well, the FBI is going to have to run you through their files. And I laughed at him, and I said, Ray, there's not a way in the world the FBI's got anything on me. And he said, well, they're going to have to go through anyway. And I just laughed at him. So he called me back in about 2 hours, and he said, well, they've approved you. And I just laughed at him. And he said, you want me to tell you what your nickname was in college? And I said, yeah. And he told me, and nobody knows my nickname, and you're not going to know it either.
Well, how in the world did they get that?
Well, they had a record on me, because it was amazing to me, but they had my nickname, and but anyway, I went to work with the Rumor Control Center, and I worked on it for I don't know, 3 or 4 days or a week in those early days, early hours of that thing. Well, there, as I mentioned, roadblocks were set up, and along about I don't know, it was about 3 or 4 days into it, people began to want to come out of Wounded Knee who lived. Their homes were in Wounded Knee, and they were not in sympathy with what the American Indian movement was doing. So they requested that they get out, and the boundaries, even though there was checkpoints and there was U.S. Marshals and FBI members. I do not remember now, but there was over 300 U.S. Marshals and FBI members that were surrounding around Wounded Knee during that time, and but there was, and even though they surrounded it, there was movement back and forth. My kids would talk about at school, their buddies, their friends, both girls and boys, would spend their days at OCS at school and their nights in Wounded Knee, and they walked back and forth and in and out of Wounded Knee. But the people who lived in there began to want to. Some of them wanted to come out, and so the word came at the Rumor Control Center. They were wanting some buses. Anybody at church or anybody that had a bus could go, and they needed to get some people out of Wounded Knee. So I said, I don't have a bus. I got a van. And they said that'll work. And so the first time I went into Wounded Knee was on a Wednesday afternoon. And I went in, and we loaded up about 15, 18 people in my van, adults and children as well. And Russell Means stuck his head in my van and was making fun of some of the girls that was leaving, calling them chicken and so on and so forth. And but anyway, I came out of Wounded Knee with that first load, and they stopped me at the government roadblock. But because I was on the Rumor Control, I had access to the radio, and there was a U-Haul van down in Wounded Knee that had all of the windows smeared with mud, with the exception of just little holes that the driver could see out of, and other windows that people could see out of. And I knew that they had indicated that there was a 50 caliber Russian machine gun that had been put in the back of this U-Haul van, and they had not seen it since. Well, when I brought my first load out, this U-Haul van led us out to the roadblock, got about 150 yards from the roadblock, pulled off the side of the road, and and waved us on in. And I went up to the government roadblock, and looking in my rearview mirror, this U-Haul van turned around, and with its back end facing the roadblock, and and I knew that there had been a 50 caliber gun unloaded into that, and there was U.S. Marshals, probably 25, 30 of them with M16s at the roadblock, had their weapons out and were behind vehicles and watching this U-Haul van. And I was between the roadblock and this U-Haul van with the 15 people I had in here. And we sat there. I had to unload everybody. They interrogated them, finding out, getting their names and where they were from and all this kind of information. But I was also interrogated as to what I saw and who and whatever was down inside there. When they finally got the people back in my van and led us through the roadblock, the U-Haul van went back down into Wounded Knee. I drove into Pine Ridge, and I got about a half mile from Pine Ridge, and here was about 5 or 6 BIA police cars stopped me and escorted me into the police station in Pine Ridge. And again, the people were unloaded and interrogated, and I was too, as well. When I got back to church that night, I told my family and the congregation that I'd never go back into Wounded Knee again, and shared what had happened. And at this time, there had been a house or two firebombed, and both in Pine Ridge and some in Wounded Knee, and it was there was hostility toward white people, and just really a lot of unrest. And so that night we agreed that my family would go up to Rapid City. We had a cousin that lived up there, and that they were going to go up and spend the rest of that week with them, and that I was going to stay and work with the Rumor Control Center and try to stay there with the work. And I promised the family that I would not be back in Wounded Knee. That one trip that I had was all I wanted of it. Well, the next day, the plea come out for more vehicles to go into Wounded Knee and pick people up, and I went back in 3 more times, and it would have worked fine, but some TV camera picked me up, my vehicle, and my family saw me on TV, and this created a lot of tension and strong feelings within my family.